Hello, wonderful viewers of Sci-Fi Stories, and thank you for joining us today. Because YouTube has disabled our monetization, we currently have no budget to pay our hardworking staff. So if you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our team can afford their living expenses and continue creating for you. You can easily help us out by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the video description or comments below. Heat blistered the air. The ceremonial plasma blade hummed. It hovered a fraction of an inch from Felix Burleson's throat. A single drop of sweat vaporized before it could even touch the glowing edge. Against this inferno, Felix remained perfectly still. He did not flinch. He did not blink. The deafening hum of alien weaponry filled the silence, but all Felix heard was the steady, mechanical ticking of the silver pocket watch in his palm. They stood on the grand observation deck of the super dreadnought Valkyrie's Wrath. Below them hung Earth. It was a miserable, gray sphere. It looked entirely dead. For thousands of years, a suffocating blanket of ash had choked the planet. It was a forgotten wasteland. Empress Kaelin leaned closer. She was a towering figure. Her skin was armored with shifting obsidian scales. Her eyes were sharp as shattered glass. She pressed the plasma blade tighter against his flesh. The searing weapon radiated a stifling heat, threatening to scorch his skin. "Give me the core codes, human," Kaelin hissed. Her voice was a grating rumble that vibrated through the metal floor. "Unlock the death dungeon. Your ancestors hoarded their core technology down there. We will take it all. Speak the codes, or I will let this blade finish its work." Felix held on to his icy composure. He completely ignored the deadly heat radiating against his jaw. Instead, his gaze remained locked on the antique pocket watch in his hand. The tiny brass gears turned with relentless precision. He spoke with absolute calm. "Earth is not a tomb. It is a cage," Kaelin sneered. She viewed humanity as a weak species prone to pathetic psychological games. She would not be swayed by a bluff. Her scales bristled with irritation. "Fire!" Kaelin commanded her officers. "Drive the energy drill directly into the Mariana Trench. Crack this dead rock open." Deep within the dreadnought, heavy machinery whined. A massive beam of concentrated energy tore out from the ship. It pierced the dark void of space. It slammed violently into the ashen crust of the planet. The exact moment the drill breached the surface, the relentless ticking in Felix's hand ceased. The brass gears froze. Instantly, the artificial gravity aboard the entire warship failed. For exactly 3 seconds, panic consumed the deck. Elite guards floated aimlessly. Heavy munitions drifted from their magnetic locks. Kaelin lost her footing, thrashing in the sudden weightlessness. Felix alone seemed unsurprised, drifting silently, with his eyes still fixed on the frozen watch. Then, the gravity slammed back online. Everyone crashed violently against the steel deck. A sound followed. It was impossible. A low, guttural frequency resonated straight through the vacuum of space. It vibrated deep within their bones. The reinforced transparency of the observation deck groaned under the unnatural pressure. Spiderweb fractures violently snapped across the thick glass. Kaelin scrambled to her feet. The plasma blade was still ignited. She brought it back to Felix's throat, but her hand was trembling. The intense heat of her weapon suddenly felt incredibly small. Below them, the gray planet was changing. The thick layers of ancient ash were swirling. Massive storms of dust tore across the continents. The crust of the planet began to shift and slide. Beneath the dead gray dirt, colossal geometric structures emerged. They were impossibly large, deep. Pulsing lights bled through the intricate lines of the geometry. The entire planet was not cracking apart. It was stretching. It was breathing. The intricate, glowing shapes began to move with synchronized purpose, grinding together like the armored plates of a gargantuan, living creature waking from a very long sleep. A blinding shockwave of pure distortion erupted from the shifting geometric plates below. It was not a laser. It was not a kinetic projectile. It was a localized entropy field, a violent ripple in the fabric of time itself. The wave crashed outward into the black void, slamming into the orbital fleet. 3 heavily armored escort cruisers, positioned just ahead of the flagship, caught the direct brunt of the blast. The highly advanced energy shielding on the vessels did not even register an attack. Superior alien technology was entirely useless against bent physical laws. In the span of 5 seconds, the 3 cruisers aged thousands of years. The shimmering titanium hulls dulled to a sickly gray, then blistered into brittle, red rust. Their structural integrity failed completely. Internal atmospheric pressure blew the weakened hulls apart, sending fragmented debris hurtling into space. Instantly, the 3 massive warships dissolved into a cloud of fine, brown space dust. There was no fiery explosion. There was only the terrifying silence of rapid decay. The mighty alien armada was reduced to absolute insignificance in the face of raw cosmic power. The grand achievements of stellar engineering were erased, as if they had never existed at all. Kaylin stumbled backward. Her eyes widened with unprecedented horror. Her glowing plasma blade extinguished automatically as she braced her heavy frame against a navigation console. The deafening hum of the ship's primary engines began to stutter and choke. "What kind of weapon is this?" she demanded. Her voice lost its commanding, arrogant edge, replaced by raw disbelief. Felix stood perfectly unaffected by the sheer panic gripping the observation deck. He spoke with the steady, measured cadence of a man who had accepted this exact fate long ago. "Earth does not rely on weapons that shoot down enemies. Our defense system accelerates temporal chaos. It speeds up the natural decay of the universe in a concentrated radius. We did not build the cage to keep you out. Humanity quarantined itself to contain this phenomenon. We locked the door from the inside to protect the rest of the universe from this exact horror." Before Kaylin could process the philosophical gravity of his words, brutal, thick blast doors slammed shut across every exit of the observation deck. The heavy thud echoed like a massive tomb sealing shut. The control panels flashed from a glowing blue to a dead, locking red. The emergency sirens began to wail, but they were abruptly cut short as the internal communication lines were severed. They were trapped. A holographic projection flickered to life above the central command table. The face of Grand Commander Xerax, Kaylin's most trusted right hand, materialized. His expression was utterly devoid of loyalty. It was entirely calculating and horribly calm. "Forgive the sudden isolation, my Empress," Xerax said. His tone dripped with cold, false reverence. "But you have served your final purpose." Kaylin lunged at the hologram. Her sharp claws scraped futilely against the hard light projection. "Xerax, what is the meaning of this? Disengage the lockdown immediately." Xerax offered a predatory, chilling smile. "I cannot do that. You see, I needed you to wake this dead rock. I needed you to trigger the temporal defense mechanism. Your fanatical loyalists are stationed on all the ships currently caught in the entropy wave. In a few minutes, every single soldier loyal to your throne will turn to dust, leaving the Empire completely in my hands. A new ruler requires a clean slate." Kaylin's heavy scales flared with pure fury. The bitter truth crashed over her. She had been manipulated. Her own arrogance, her relentless pursuit of human core technology, had blinded her to the treacherous snake lurking in her own shadow. She had personally marched her loyal subjects into an absolute massacre. She was a grand conqueror who had just conquered her own doom. "You will never survive this," Kaylin roared. Her booming voice shook the metal deck plates beneath their feet. "I will not be here to witness the end," Xerax replied smoothly. "To ensure the complete eradication of your loyalists and this cursed planet, I have authorized the launch of a tachyon missile, A time antiparticle payload is currently heading straight into the core of Earth. When it detonates, it will cause a temporal explosion massive enough to wipe out this entire solar system. The history books will record that humanity destroyed you. Goodbye, Kalen. The hologram vanished abruptly. Outside the fractured glass of the observation deck, a brilliant tear in space ripped open. A massive wormhole stabilized, radiating a harsh, violet light. Zerax's rebel fleet ignited their thrusters and began surging into the gateway, leaving the flagship behind to rot. The Valkyrie's wrath groaned in agony. The edge of the entropy field was touching the dreadnought now. The polished floors beneath Kalen's boots began to pit and oxidize rapidly. The advanced lighting fixtures flickered and died as centuries of wear and tear happened in mere moments. Paint peeled away. Thick energy cables frayed and snapped. The ship was dying. Kalen fell to her knees. Her empire was gone. Her life was ending in a rusting cage. The crushing weight of her failure paralyzed her mind. "Get up!" Felix barked. The quiet calmness was completely gone. It was replaced by a sudden, jagged urgency. "It is over," Kalen whispered. She stared blankly at her own hands as the metal armor on her gauntlets began to tarnish and crack. "We are already ghosts. Only if we stay here," Felix said. He rushed to the sealed blast doors. He did not bother with the digital interface panel. It was heavily encrypted by Zerax. Instead, Felix ripped back the synthetic skin on his left forearm. Beneath the fake human flesh was a complex, interlocking network of classic mechanical gears. It was a pure analog mechanism, completely isolated from any digital network or advanced software. He jammed a protruding physical connector from his mechanical arm directly into the manual override socket hidden inside the doorframe. Sparks flew violently into the air. The tiny brass and steel gears in his arm whirred furiously. They were mechanically forcing the electronic lock to disengage through raw brute force. The heavy blast doors ground open with a horrific screech of tearing metal. "Digital locks cannot stop an analog key," Felix yelled over the deafening groan of the deteriorating ship. He grabbed the towering alien Empress by her heavy shoulder plate. With a surge of unexpected strength, he dragged her out of the collapsing observation deck, just as the ceiling began to cave in violently behind them. The dreadnought's corridors were screaming. Metal groaned and sheared as invisible jaws of accelerated time chewed through the bulkheads. Felix did not hesitate. He shoved the towering Empress through a heavy, circular hatch hidden deep within the ship's holding bay. She tumbled into the cramped, metallic belly of an ancient human drop pod. It was an ugly, brutalist piece of machinery, completely devoid of the elegant, sweeping curves of imperial design. Its hull was forged from dense, chronal-resistant alloys, a dull gray metal that seemed to absorb the ambient light rather than reflect it. It was the only vessel aboard capable of surviving the chaotic physics raging outside. Felix threw himself into the pilot seat and slammed his hand against the manual release lever. Explosive bolts detonated. The pod detached from the decaying flagship and plummeted into the void. Outside the viewport, the sky was tearing itself apart. The atmosphere of the planet did not burn with the usual friction of entry. Instead, it fractured. Massive, swirling clouds of temporal displacement shattered like jagged pieces of stained glass, reflecting twisted fragments of alternate realities. Splinters of frozen light and localized paradoxes scraped against the armored hull of the pod, shrieking like tortured ghosts. Kalen gripped her harness. The Empress of 1,000 conquered worlds, a warrior who had bathed in the blood of countless species, was now entirely powerless. She could only stare in wide-eyed terror as they fell through a sky that looked like a broken mirror. They hurtled downward, accelerating toward the darkest scar on the planet's surface. They aimed directly for the Mariana Trench. The pod hit the oceanless, ashen abyss with a deafening crack. They were supposed to crush against the solid bedrock, but the ground simply gave way. The crust of the dead planet opened, swallowing the tiny vessel into the absolute dark. Then, the darkness gave way to a soft, ethereal luminescence. The pod stabilized, firing reverse thrusters that echoed through an impossibly vast cavern. Kaylin unbuckled her safety harness and pressed her heavy, scaled hands against the thick glass of the viewport. The breath caught in her throat. The barren, gray wasteland above was nothing but a shell, a decoy designed to ward off the curious and the greedy. This was the real Earth. They were descending into a hollow, subterranean superstructure so immense it completely defied all spatial logic. It was an entire living world built inside the husk of a dead one. Lush, emerald forests and winding crystalline rivers stretched across floating terrace platforms that spanned hundreds of miles. These perfectly preserved ecosystems were bathed in the gentle, golden glow of an artificial inner sun suspended at the very core. It was a serene, breathtaking paradise, a stark contrast to the brutal, militaristic empire Kaylin had spent her life expanding. She was a bringer of endless war, standing in the heart of absolute, eternal peace. But the sprawling forests were only the surface layer. Woven seamlessly into the bedrock of this hidden paradise were the great machines. Colossal, continent-sized brass and steel gears turned with agonizing slowness. Their rhythmic thumping was the literal heartbeat of the planet, a deep, resonant pulse that vibrated through the dense hull of the pod. Flanking the massive turning gears were towering spires of polished glass and silver. Inside these quiet spires rested the entirety of humanity. There were billions of them, endless, geometric arrays of cryogenic stasis pods lined the curved walls of the grand cavern, stretching downward into the unfathomable depths. Every man, woman, and child of the human race slept peacefully, bathed in a soft blue light, completely unaware of the apocalyptic storm raging above their heads. They looked like fragile, pale statues, dreaming in a sacred, silent sanctuary. "You are not a diplomat," Kaylin breathed. Her harsh voice softened into a whisper of pure awe, a sound she had never made in her entire life. No mere messenger would possess the access codes to a place like this. Felix powered down the pod's main engines as they drifted toward a massive, metallic landing platform near the central axis of the great gears. He unfastened his restraints and looked at her. His expression was heavy with the crushing weight of centuries. "No, I am not," Felix replied quietly. "I am a keeper. I was born nearly 4,000 years ago, but I have only been awake for a fraction of that time. My order is awakened once every 100 years to walk these silent halls. We oil the great gears. We recalibrate the stasis fields. We ensure the planet continues to tick. We are the lonely caretakers of a sleeping race." The pod touched down with a heavy, metallic thud. The pressurized hatch hissed open, letting in air that tasted crisp and clean, smelling strongly of pine needles and charged ozone. Felix stepped out onto the vast platform, but his mechanical arm suddenly twitched violently. A high-pitched, erratic clicking sound emanated from the grand machinery ahead. Kaylin followed his gaze, and the profound serenity of the moment shattered instantly. Lodged deep within the colossal teeth of the primary chronal gear, the central mechanism regulating the entire planetary time field, was the tachyon missile. Zarax had not missed his mark. The warhead was a jagged, ugly cylinder of dark matter, completely alien to the harmonious design of the Keeper's machinery. It had punched through the outer crust and wedged itself right into the heart of the machine. It had not detonated yet, but it was bleeding. Sickly, violet veins of raw tachyon radiation pulsed out from the metal casing, infecting the pristine brass of the massive gear. The delicate balance of the subterranean world was actively failing. All around them, the soft blue lights of the closest stasis pods began to flicker erratically, turning an angry, warning red. The temporal shielding protecting the sleeping billions was rapidly destabilizing. If that warhead goes off, it will not just destroy this planet, Felix said. His voice tightened with a sudden, desperate fear that Kalen had not seen when a plasma blade was at his throat. The sheer density of the temporal energy contained in this superstructure will collapse inward. It will create a chronal black hole. It will swallow the solar system, then your empire, and eventually the entire galaxy. Everything that ever was, or ever will be dragged into an infinite loop of pure nothingness. Kalen looked at the helpless, sleeping humans, then at the leaking missile threatening to devour reality itself. The Grand Warlord realized in that quiet moment that the universe did not need to be conquered. Right now, it desperately needed to be saved. The violet glow of the leaking missile infected the subterranean mechanical forest, casting long, unnatural shadows across the giant brass trees. But the shadows were moving on their own. The raw tachyon radiation did not simply poison the ancient machinery. It fractured local space. From these jagged tears in reality, time wraiths emerged. They were not biological creatures. They were predatory anomalies, shifting silhouettes of static and distorted light that moved with terrifying, erratic speed. They hunted by sensing the linear flow of time within living things, hungering to consume it. Kalen crouched behind a massive, rusted steel root, her breath ragged. She reached up and violently tore off her heavy, dead ceremonial armor plates, tossing them into the synthetic ferns. Without the flagship's power grid, the armor was just a metal coffin. For the first time in her long, bloody life, the mighty Empress was not the apex predator. She was prey. Stripped of her fleet, her guards, and her superior technology, she was forced to swallow her massive pride. She had to rely entirely on her raw, brutal survival instincts and Felix's intricate knowledge of the labyrinthine gears. They moved silently through the damp undergrowth. Felix guided them with hand signals, navigating the treacherous terrain where gravity sometimes shifted sideways and seconds skipped like a scratched audio record. The air smelled of charged ozone and old copper. A piercing screech tore through the damp air, a sound like tearing metal and human screams overlapping. A time wraith materialized directly above them, dropping from the canopy of a colossal bronze oak tree. Its form was a chaotic blur of freezing energy, distorting the air around it like a severe heat wave. It lunged straight for Kalen, its distorted, shifting claws aiming directly for her chest to age her heart into dust. She raised her arms to block, bracing for the inevitable end. Instead, a violent shove hit her shoulder. Felix threw his body between her and the falling anomaly. He pushed her hard into the dirt and raised his real, human right arm to deflect the shifting mass of energy. The wraith collided with him. The impact did not throw him back. Instead, the localized entropy sank immediately into his flesh. In a fraction of a second, the skin on his right arm turned a sickly, ashen gray. The muscle mass dissolved, sinking inward as if decades of starvation happened in a single blink. His bone calcified, turning brittle and dry beneath the withering, parchment-like skin. Felix collapsed to his knees, biting his lower lip until blood ran down his chin to stop himself from screaming. The time wraith, its temporal energy temporarily discharged into the keeper, shattered into a shower of harmless, violet sparks. Kalen scrambled to her feet and dragged him into a narrow, dark crevice beneath a giant, stationary cog. The space was tight and smelled of ancient grease. She tore a long strip of fabric from her royal undertunic and began tightly binding his shriveled, agonizingly fragile arm. Her clawed hands, built for executing traitors and tearing flesh, moved with surprising, deliberate care. Felix was breathing heavily, his face pale and drenched in a cold, shivering sweat. "Why did you do that?" Kalen asked, her harsh voice dropping to a low, tight whisper. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a profound, unsettling confusion. She tightened the makeshift bandage, tying it off securely. She looked out into the vast, silent machinery of the sleeping world, then down at the fragile human bleeding for her. Your species built a machine that can control the flow of time. You possess the ultimate weapon. You could age entire armadas into dust. Why are you hiding in the dark? Why did humanity not use this absolute power to conquer the universe? Felix leaned the back of his head against the cold steel of the cog. He took a slow, ragged breath, his eyes heavy with an ancient sorrow. Because limitless power is just a self-built prison. If we had marched outward with time itself as our sword, we would have easily enslaved the stars. We would have crushed every empire, including yours. But we also would have lost our souls in the process. We saw the horrors we were truly capable of. We chose sleep, so we would not turn into monsters. The quiet words struck Kaylin harder than any physical blow she had ever endured in battle. Her entire empire, her entire reason for existing, was built on the absolute law that the strong must oppress the weak to survive. Conquer, or be conquered. Burn, or be burned. Yet here was a species that held the power of gods in their hands, and they willingly chose eternal exile simply to preserve their own compassion. She looked closely at the frail, aging man beside her. He possessed more true strength in his dying, withered arm than her entire invincible armada had in all their heavy cannons. For the first time in her life, she saw humanity not as pathetic cowards, but as terrifying titans of restraint. They rested for exactly 15 minutes before Felix forced himself to stand. They had to keep moving. The violet pulse of the missile was growing faster, acting like a violent heartbeat threatening to burst the chest of the planet. They navigated the final stretch of the mechanical forest, emerging onto a vast, circular observation platform directly overlooking the primary chronal gear. The massive dark matter warhead was lodged tightly between two colossal brass teeth, humming with a lethal, building intensity. But the path to the missile was not clear. Hovering in precise, geometric formations around the warhead were a dozen mechanical assassin drones. Their sleek, silver carapaces reflected the violent violet radiation. Zarax had not just fired the missile. He had deployed a vanguard of heavy combat units to ensure no one could interfere with the detonation sequence. The drones swept the immediate area with lethal, red targeting lasers, their heavy weapon systems fully armed and humming with searing plasma energy. They blocked the only path to the core. The red targeting lasers sliced through the shadows. A mechanical shriek echoed across the colossal observation platform. The assassin drones had found them. 6 silver carapaces folded backward, revealing twin-linked plasma cannons. The air burned as a volley of superheated energy blasts tore toward their position. Kaylin did not retreat. She roared, a primal sound that shook the rust from the surrounding pipes, and ignited her ceremonial plasma blade. The weapon, once meant to slice through the throats of subjugated kings, now flared to life as a desperate shield. She threw her massive, armored body in front of Felix. Her blade spun in a blistering arc, catching 3 incoming plasma bolts. The impact sent a bone-shattering shockwave up her arms, but she held her ground. She was no longer an Empress demanding tribute. She was a living barricade. "Move to the console!" Kaylin shouted over the deafening roar of weapons fire. "I will hold them back!" Felix sprinted across the metal grating, clutching his withered right arm to his chest. He slid behind the massive brass control pedestal at the base of the primary chronal gear. The tachyon missile pulsed angrily, just a few yards above him. The temporal radiation was warping the environment into a chaotic nightmare. Gravity began to fail and shift in erratic bursts. One moment, they weighed nothing. The next, they weighed 3 times their normal mass. Kaylin used the chaos to her advantage. As the gravity shifted sideways, pulling them toward a sheer drop into the abyss, She launched herself off a towering steel pillar. She intercepted a drone mid-air, driving her fiery blade straight through its optical sensor. The machine exploded into a shower of sparks, tumbling endlessly into the dark beneath them. Another drone attempted to flank her. It flew too close to a localized time fracture bleeding from the missile. In a fraction of a second, the lethal machine was caught in an extreme entropy bubble, its shiny silver armor instantly tarnished. The flight repulsor sputtered and died as centuries of decay ravaged its internal systems. It crumbled into brown dust before it could even fire a single shot. "How much time do we have?" Kaylin demanded, deflecting another volley of blinding plasma. Her muscles screamed in agony. The sheer kinetic force of the blasts was pushing her backward, inch by agonizing inch, toward the edge of the platform. Felix ripped the access panel off the brass pedestal with his mechanical left hand. He jammed his analog interface cables into the ancient port. The massive gears above them groaned in protest. He looked up at the digital readout, pulsating on the dark matter warhead. 3 minutes, Felix yelled, his voice raw. Exactly 3 minutes until detonation. The reality of the timeline hit Kaylin like a physical blow. If that warhead breached, it would not just crack the planet, it would ignite a chain reaction. A temporal domino effect would tear through the fabric of the universe. Every star, every planet, every living soul would be ripped from the timeline and shredded into absolute nothingness. Felix's mechanical fingers blurred across the manual override switches. The massive control array lit up with frantic, flashing warnings. "The encryption is too deep," he shouted, panic finally bleeding into his steady voice. "I cannot disarm the payload digitally." Xerax locked the sequence to the missile internal dark matter core. "Then how do we stop it?" Kaylin screamed, parrying a point-blank blast from a diving drone. The heat of the deflection scorched the side of her face, but she did not blink. "We have to manually reverse the polarity of the primary chronal gear," Felix answered, frantically rerouting the massive analog cables. "If we spin the gear backward, we can create an inverse temporal wave. It will neutralize the tachyon radiation and collapse the warhead inward." "Do it," she commanded, kicking the shattered remains of a drone away from her boots. "I cannot," Felix yelled back, his eyes wide with desperate realization. "The gear requires a massive surge of pure dark matter to force an immediate reversal. The planetary core cannot provide it fast enough. We need an external power source right now. We need the core of your blade." Kaylin froze. The plasma blade hummed loudly in her grip. Time seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. This sword was not just a weapon. It was the physical manifestation of her divine right to rule. It held the dark matter core forged by the first emperor of her bloodline. It was her honor. It was her identity. To destroy this blade was to sever her connection to her ancestors. It meant stripping herself of her crown, her title, and her entire empire. Without it, she was not an empress. She was just a soldier. 2 more drones locked their targeting lasers onto her chest. The high-pitched whine of their cannons charging filled the heavy air. Felix did not beg. He did not plead for his life or the lives of the billions sleeping in the dark below. He looked away from the console and met her sharp, reptilian eyes. His gaze was perfectly steady, cutting through the chaos of the battlefield. "You came here to conquer a world," Felix said, his voice ringing with absolute clarity over the deafening noise. "Now, you must choose. Be the queen of a pile of ashes, or be the savior of futures yet to come." The countdown hit exactly 1 minute. The purple radiation from the missile flared, threatening to consume them all. Kaylin looked at the blade. She looked at the frail, broken human who had sacrificed his own flesh to save her. Then, she looked at the universe she was about to lose. With a furious, earth-shattering scream that tore from the very bottom of her soul, Kaylin did not strike the drones. She brought the blazing plasma sword down heavily across her own armored knee. The indestructible alien metal snapped with a blinding flash. The plasma beam sputtered and died instantly. In her hand, the shattered hilt cracked open, revealing a pulsating, pitch-black orb of pure, concentrated, dark matter. Ignoring the searing heat that blistered her palms, she lunged toward the control pedestal. She bypassed Felix completely, slamming the raw, dark matter core directly into the open primary power conduit of the chronal gear. "Live!" she roared, driving it deep into the machinery. The connection was violent and immediate. A shockwave of pure, blinding white light erupted from the conduit. It did not explode with heat or fire. It exploded with utter silence. The searing light washed over the pedestal, swallowed the charging drones, and engulfed the deadly tachyon missile above. In exactly one heartbeat, the frantic noise of the battle ceased. The red lasers vanished. The turning gears halted. Time itself froze completely solid within the grand chamber. The blinding white light expanded, but it carried no heat. It was a chronal shockwave, a massive ripple of reverse time. It washed over the lethal tachyon missile, dissolving the violent purple radiation and unmaking the weapon until it simply ceased to exist. The shockwave surged upward, piercing the crust and radiating into the cold void of space. It struck the crumbling super dreadnought in orbit. The rusted hull reversed its rapid decay. The shattered glass reformed. The ship was whole once more, was whole once. The wave did not stop there. It chased the violent tear of the wormhole, catching Grand Commander Zerax and his fleeing rebel armada. But it did not destroy them. Instead, it locked them in an eternal moment of temporal stasis. Every ship, every traitorous soldier, was frozen perfectly in the void. It was an absolute, bloodless victory. Back in the subterranean core, the temporal reversal washed over Felix. The sickly, gray skin on his right arm smoothed out. The withered muscle rebuilt itself instantly, restoring his flesh to perfect health. But the miraculous healing came at a devastating cost. The immense energy required to reverse the polarity had entirely drained the core engine of Earth. The colossal brass gears slowed to a complete halt. The planetary shielding, the impenetrable cage that had hidden humanity for millennia, simply dissolved. The holographic sky above shattered into nothingness, exposing the grand cavern to the open stars. Billions of sleeping humans lay in their fragile glass pods, entirely defenseless. Kaylin stood breathing heavily in the sudden, profound silence. She was completely unarmed. The symbol of her eternal reign was shattered at her feet. Reaching up to her internal communication implant, which was now fully functional, she broadcasted a secure frequency to the loyalist commanders aboard the restored flagship. "This is your Empress," she ordered. "Arrest the traitor Zerax. His fleet is frozen. Secure the perimeter." Felix stepped forward. He placed his newly healed human body squarely between the towering alien warlord and the endless rows of sleeping stasis pods. The defense system was dead. Humanity was exposed. He braced himself, fully expecting the great conqueror to finally claim her ultimate prize. He waited for the order of enslavement. Kaylin looked at the small, fragile man standing defiantly in front of his slumbering world. She reached up and unfastened the heavy clasps of her royal battle cloak, letting the dark fabric drop to the rusted floor. To the absolute shock of the entire listening armada in orbit, the Empress of 1,000 worlds slowly lowered herself to one knee before the human keeper. She activated the universal broadcast channel, projecting her voice across every star system under her command. "Hear my decree," Kaylin proclaimed, her voice ringing with a newfound reverence. "From this moment until the end of time, the Sol system is declared an inviolable sanctuary. Earth is hereby placed under the absolute protection of the Empire. Any vessel that crosses their borders with hostile intent will answer to me." She deactivated the broadcast and looked up at Felix. A soft, genuine smile broke across her scarred face. She finally understood the ultimate truth of the universe. The reason you never touch Earth is not because humanity possesses a weapon of unimaginable destruction. It is because their profound compassion possesses the absolute power to redeem, to humble, and to entirely change the soul of any conqueror. Hello, wonderful viewers. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for listening to this story today. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let us know in the comments. If you found today's story captivating, please consider helping us with just $1. You can support our channel by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the video description or comments. Since YouTube turned off our monetization, your generosity is the only way we can pay our staff, help them feed their families, and continue creating even better stories for you. Thank you again, and have a beautiful day.